Hi, everybody. This is Amelia Vogler and the Executive Director of the Healing Touch Professional Associations. And I have with me this afternoon one of my favorite people. Lynne McTaggart is one of the central voices in the New Consciousness movement. She's also the award-winning author of 7 books, including worldwide bestsellers, The Field, The Intention Experiment, The Bond, and her latest and one of my absolute favorites, The Power of 8. She also serves as the editorial director of What Doctors Don't Tell You. I'll send you the link to that. It's extraordinary, and it's one of the world's most highly praised health publications. I'd love to start and just start high level and talk a little bit about how our thoughts affect our clients or our patients.
Okay, well, this is why I set up this webinar, Amelia, because I work as editor of What Doctors Don't Tell You. I know lots of practitioners of every variety, fantastic practitioners. And because I also work with the power of thoughts, I've observed over the years so many different practitioners who are wonderful at what they do, but don't realize that their thoughts about their patients before and afterward, even during, if they have thoughts. But if they're taught not to use thinking while they're healing, they still have thoughts about their patient's progress and the prognosis before and afterward. And one of the things that I've discovered through the new science is that we are all leaky buckets. You know, thoughts are not locked inside our heads. Thoughts are things, not only things, but things that affect other things. I've certainly demonstrated that through the intention experiment and all the science in that book, the intention experiment, about the effect of thoughts. But we also know from the new science that, we're beaming out our thoughts 24/7, and they are being heard all the time. On my Intention Masterclass, which is a year-long online course that I give, a webinar course, I have people online do little experiments where they send thoughts to each other silently. And these are total strangers who live in opposite ends of the globe, and in so many instances, the recipient picks up exactly what the person has thought. And we do all kinds of experiments with embedding thoughts in water, and all of that demonstrates, and 9 times out of 10, a good percentage of people pick up, say, the word. Let's say I've thought of a word banana, and I've sent that into this jar of water. I've held up that water in front of my audience or my group on a webinar, and a load of them, a very good percentage, pick up the shape or even the word banana or the color. It's just, it's uncanny, except that it's not, because the new science demonstrates we are picking up what other people are thinking. So just take that and think about the prognoses that you're thinking in your head, or you're thinking about this patient, something that you can't help really think, well, they're not doing very well, or they're not going to do very well, or I wonder if I do this, if they'll still be lame. I mean, I actually collect statements that practitioners say about patients. And one set of them was really interesting, relating to a situation with an accident and problems afterward. I listened to a whole batch of practitioners say things like, well, I wonder if we do, these are good practitioners, alternative practitioners. It's going to be a long, slow path to recovery, said one. I wonder if you do this, if you're still going to be so lame. I wonder, I think that we're really looking here at joint replacement surgery. Everything they're saying is negative, not quantified by anything. an opinion that has a devastating effect on their client. But the same thing happens when they're thinking that. They're thinking something about the patient not doing well. So the real purpose, and they can't help themselves, because they're thinking, oh, well, I'm thinking this, so it's not broadcasting. The problem is, it is. And so my course is really about demonstrating this and also helping practitioners be better broadcasters, more positive cheerleaders, because that is probably your most important role, even more than all of the technique that you have, all of the expertise you have in healing. We have so much evidence about mind-body medicine and the power of the placebo that the patient's attitude toward his illness and the hope generated by that practitioner is the most important medicine he can give.
That's so compelling. I'm thinking back to how many times I've been driving in thinking about what a new client would be coming in with, because I have my intake forms and I've seen their story and I've identified a few patterns, and now really having some moments of self-reflection around what am I sticking them to before I even arrive with them. And
Exactly.
and that's a very profound idea, I think, because we all step in the highest good of our clients. And I think that the reverse is then true, that if we continue to think the highest and always read with the highest and hold the highest outcome in our thoughts as well, that the inverse is also true, that we're entraining that highest energy on their behalf as well. So such a powerful practice.
Absolutely, and it's so necessary, and this is never taught, because we know from the science, for instance, that a single argument with someone else can, if you have an argument with someone else, if you have a cut, a wound, it will take a whole day longer to heal as a result of that argument. So imagine if somebody says to you, there's nothing we can do for you, or it's not going as well as we thought, or anything like that. Or as you say, pigeonholing them as somebody with a really difficult problem before you've even met that person is transmitted. So this isn't about people blaming themselves. This is about us taking on board new information that can help us become even better at what we do. So I really want to make that point to healers. Nobody's castigating you for this. Thinking and negative thinking is what we all do, particularly to ourselves. As one good friend of mine once put it, if I said to other people what I think about myself, I wouldn't have any friends. And that's, we all have those kinds of thoughts, that negative self-talk. Well, we also have negative other talk that we don't mean to. We're just narrating what we think is the problem with them. And that is what I want to try to do, is just help healers work out their plan, but without characterizing their patients as difficult or easy or impossible to heal or whatever. Because the bottom line is, nobody can tell with any certainty, no one, how someone is going to respond to the challenge of healing. We all can't. We can't. I've seen too many instant healings in Power of 8 groups of so-called no-hoper diseases to know there's never a prognosis that is accurate, is 100% accurate.
That's absolutely right. Lynn, in our work in Healing Touch, we have a 10-step sequence or protocol that we follow. And one of those steps is grounding and centering. And our centering practice is to essentially, bring us into the present moment and kind of allow our day-to-day thoughts to shift on to the background. And so we've cultivated a little bit of a different strategy in meeting our clients in an open place, but it sounds like, that's welcome in this work. It's just that, you're adding on and you're identifying other areas in which we can work with our thoughts. Does that sound right?
Absolutely, because you're going to have thoughts before and you're going to have thoughts after about that patient. So it's not about your practice, which sounds wonderful. You're getting into a state of total presence with your client and something in a sense beyond language. But what we're really talking about is the thinking patterns and habits that you unconsciously hold before and afterward. Or you may not realize, most of us don't realize, that our thoughts are leaking outside us all the time, that we're beaming 24/7. And also, there's another aspect of it, which is all about your client's thinking.
Uh-huh.
They come in with a whole agenda of issues that are related to their condition. Not only the sense of hopelessness, particularly, they may have been on a whole trail of attempting to get well and come to you, and you are the 8th therapist they've seen. Mm-hmm. And they are feeling hopeless and negative and all of those things. Or they've been given a diagnosis that this is incurable, by a conventional doctor. So they have all of that stuff. Then they have possibly the emotions and the thinking habits that have brought them to this place to begin with. And so one of the other things I teach is, particularly for those patients who aren't getting better, how they can go back to certain seed moments when the illness just started, or even seed moments that were traumas in their lives, and change that, not change what was said by the other party or what actually happened, change their response to it. And it's so powerful. I've seen it over and over, clear people. So I have certain techniques I want to show healers that can work really well with the patients that aren't doing well.
That's wonderful. And what about affecting their own healing?
You mean
how thoughts can affect their own healing?
They're so key. They are probably the most important element to it. Conventional doctors poo-poo the placebo effect. They say, it's just a placebo effect. The placebo effect works 60 to 70% of the time. It's probably the best drug we've ever had. And it is, there is a friend of ours who has a thing called the X pill. It's just a pill filled with rice bran. People know it's a placebo, but they take it, and he's recorded, thousands of people who have got better taking this rice bran because it's called a pill. It's an X pill. And there have been studies demonstrating that even when people know they're being given a placebo by their doctor, when the doctor says, I want you to take this, and they say, and they are willing to do so, they get better because their doctor told them to do it. There are all kinds of interesting aspects of our thoughts and healing that are so powerful. And the other thing about thoughts and healing is we now understand that, illness and health has, as Dr. Leo Gallen puts it, 4 pillars. And there's not only diet and supplements and exercise, but also things like relationships and community. And community is something that I've been really interested in since writing my book, The Bond. The power of groups, of communities, and also small groups, as I've looked at in my latest book, they can be so healing and strengthening. And so people are a complex mix of all of these kinds of areas when it comes to health. And so their thinking, that emotional piece that comes with relationships and community is probably the most important element, the thinking patterns around your life. they know with cancer patients, for instance, that oftentimes they fit, when they've looked at spontaneous healings, and this is Institute of Noetic Sciences doing these studies, they found that they fall into a pattern. The people who have had spontaneous healings, not only of cancer, but lots of other serious illnesses, they find that oftentimes it's when they make a spiritual and mental and emotional switch, where they are in a dead end, a situation where it's a dead end situation, and that perhaps they have felt for a long time that things will never get better. That is oftentimes a pattern with patients who have had cancer. And when they make a conscious decision to change that situation, leave the terrible job, leave the abusive husband, whatever it is that's creating that trapped rat feeling, they can get better. They're thinking, oftentimes patients are ill because they're thinking the wrong thoughts. So that's part of my course too, is just having that be conscious and worked on. And one of the best ways of working on it, I have found, are these retro intention techniques.
Sounds incredible. I'm looking forward to working with them, because we really, in our work, acknowledge that the past and the present and the future is all right here.
Yeah.
And we can navigate time quite easily. So it's really, everything is present for us to work with, and there's complete opportunity there to shift anything that's possible.
Absolutely. And the scientists say this now. I mean, the quantum physicists have all said basically that time as this forward-going arrow is erroneous, that
Yes.
time is much more like one big smeared out now. So, I talk a bit about that in my course too, so that people are comfortable that we're not just doing something woo-woo, that there's really some good science around the idea that the past is ever present and it is affecting us.
That's lovely. And Lynn, you spoke to this a little bit around groups, but how do thoughts work in a group healing, or how did you come up with? When did you learn about the small groups? I'd love to hear.
I set up the intention experiment largely because I was a skeptic, and I wanted to. There was all this stuff about manifestation and the law of attraction. And while I'm intrigued by this, I'm an investigative reporter by background, so I'm a pretty hard-nosed skeptic when it comes to evidence. I want evidence and proof. So I wanted to test this. I thought, well, okay, if thoughts are things that affect other things, how far can we take this? Are we talking about just shifting a quantum particle? Are we talking about saving people from burning buildings and ending cancer? How far can we go? So, and I was also very intrigued by the idea of lots of people thinking the same thought at the same time. Does that magnify the effect? So I set up the intention experiment to test this. And, I didn't really expect it to work, but it really worked. I mean, we've done 33 experiments to date, 29 of which have shown measurable, significant, mostly positive effects. And we've done everything from trying to make seeds grow faster. And that was an experiment that the Healing Touch practitioners were part of in 2007, to trying to purify water, to lowering violence in war-torn areas, to even healing somebody of PTSD. And all of those 29 worked. Wow. So I was astonished. I mean, there's no pharmaceutical drug out there with that kind of track record. But I was thinking around 2008, I wonder if I could scale this down into a little workshop. But I wasn't really sure what to do or how to do this. And so I was just kicking around the idea with my husband one day and said, I don't know, maybe I'll put people in groups of 8 or so and have them send healing to someone with a health challenge in the group. And he's such a great headline writer. He's also a journalist. And he said, yeah, I love it. The power of 8. And that is literally how it started. 2008, first workshop in Chicago, put people in groups. Don't expect it to work very well. I knew how to teach people about the power of intention because I'd studied a lot of science around how to do intention and also a lot of ancient wisdom. I'd worked with intention masters like master healers and Qigong masters to observe what commonalities were there with all of them. that I could distill into a simple program, which I have done. But I wasn't sure about small groups. Well, should they be in a circle? Should they hold hands? Should they do this? Should they do that? Well, I'm kind of making it up as I go along. So I'm telling them this, assuming, and telling them to come back the next day, assuming it's going to be a nice little feel-good effect, like a facial. And it definitely was not. People came back saying things like, we had all of the recipients come back, take the mic in turn, talk about what had happened. And we said, yeah, a woman come forward and say, I have cataracts and I'm 80% better. And somebody else with terrible knee problems due for a joint replacement surgery who said, I was barely able to walk and I'm walking normally today. We had somebody with terrible IBS say, my stomach feels normal. We had somebody else with terrible depression said that's lifted, and on and on and on it went for over an hour. So we were pretty shocked by this. And I kept going, trying to test this in future workshops. And in every workshop I held, and I assumed, oh, this is a placebo effect. But it wasn't, because many of the senders were also getting better too. And I've run thousands of groups to date. And, I can pretty much guarantee that a goodly number of them will experience at least one instantaneous healing. And we've had everything from people with stage 4 cancer, arthritis, a lot of people with due for joint or hip replacements. We had a woman with a dislocated arm, shoulder, have that just slot back into place. We had a woman who couldn't see focus after having a stroke, and her eyes focused normally after this. And these are people who never practiced it before, who did a 10-minute procedure with their group. So, of course, this completely freaked me out. And I spent a good 10 years trying to get up the nerve to write about this, but also I had to study it and understand it. So when you asked me, how does this work? I think there's a load of things that work with this dynamic. There is the power of intention and the power of group intention. And I've demonstrated that has power. But there's also group effects themselves. There's a kind of resonant and, as one psychologist put it, collective effervescence that happens in a group. Where people are just so energized by the collective group effect and group energy. I mean, it doesn't take long when people are in a group for their brainwaves to start mimicking each other when they're involved in the same activity. There's also, and this is a huge piece, the power of altruism. One of the things that I've found is the most powerful thing, particularly in my year-long master classes, where a number of people are taking it because they have health challenges. If they're stuck, I will often say to them, get off of yourself. Stop having the group intend for you, intend for other people for a while and see what happens. And that is an extraordinarily powerful mechanism for people's self-healing. And there's a lot of science around it. They demonstrated in one study that people who have the same condition, when they try to help other people with the same condition, they get better. In my book, The Power of Eight, I have a really interesting study of a psychologist who did a study of people with depression. Got 400 people with clinical depression, divided them into 2 groups, had one group be the group that would be prayed for, because he wanted to see whether prayer could help mental illness. And then the other group, he taught how to pray for them. And afterward, he was also a priest, not only a psychologist. Afterward, he did a whole bunch of parameters measuring how well they were doing and if they'd improved. And he found the group that had the prayer done for them, the people who had been prayed for, did better. They were better in every regard, but nowhere near as good as the people who had done the praying for them. So it's really interesting. Over and over again, you see altruism is a powerful, powerful healer. It's like a bulletproof vest. People who do things for other people are healthier in every regard. They live longer, they're happier. So I think a big piece is the altruism. And finally, there's some sort of X factor in these small groups that is just so powerful. I think it's the idea that a group of strangers are sending loving intention to you that is totally strengthening and something we don't have in our life.
Yeah, it's brilliant. There's so many aspects of that, you know, the esoteric ideas around, you know, as without, so within, and that, you know, system of balance that evolutionarily, that's what we're evolving towards, always unity and harmony. I'm really curious because I work with a lot of trauma, seeing the connection between the vagus nerve and our social engagement system. You know, finding that traveling nerve that innervates almost every major organ, that is entrenched in the idea that we need the other to balance ourselves. I mean, there's so many underlying aspects to your work that I find so curious and remarkable. And even that, you know, I'm sure that 8 is not an accident in cosmology. You know, it's the highest level of harmony before there's something new.
I guess it wasn't. I mean, it was in the way we discovered it, but I suppose there are no accidents. The vagus nerve is a really interesting piece here because, and this is part of, I think, healing lots of things, not only individuals, but societies. You know, I was really interested in trying to use the intention experiment to heal a warring batch of people.
Right. I think I participated in that one.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well, so in late 2017, I had the opportunity to work with special technology where I was in a studio and I was being beamed out to different locations with the camera. And so we had it beamed out to 8 different Muslim cities. And then the 9th camera was with a auditorium filled with Israeli Jews. So we had Muslims from all of these different Gulf states, and then we had Israeli Jews coming together to do an intention experiment to lower violence in a part of Jerusalem. So we did this, and afterward, because of the technology, I could speak to them, they could speak to me and to each other. So I started asking the different groups, well, how did you find that? And, you know, they were weeping, they were wailing, they were sending love to the Israelis. The Israelis were saying, your God is my God. The Arabs were saying, we love you, sister. You know, it was back and forth like that. It was amazing. And of course, there's a wonderful explanation for this, which is the work of Dacher Keltner in University of California, Berkeley, who has studied the vagus nerve. And he has found that when we do something altruistic, we do something that gets us off of ourselves, even looking at pictures of starving children, it activates the vagus nerve. And one of the elements of the vagus nerve activation, as you say, it's the longest nerve in the body. It's ties in all of the vital organs, and it also is involved in compassion, all of those good type feelings. But when it's activated, it also makes us feel closer to the other, people who are not like us. So this is a really interesting piece if you think of the Power of 8 group vis-a-vis people healing in it and individuals. You get off of yourself, you get that connection with other people, you feel closer to them, even no matter what their backgrounds and differences. And I've seen that in Power of 8 groups. People are hugging and crying, and they are suddenly an intention family. And again, this is really, really healing. This is really strengthening. Of course, my plan is to try to roll this out next year with the big, it being an election year in America, and I want to get Republicans and Democrats coming together and doing a big intention experiment. We're planning a big event for this. Lovely. So, just as an aside, I think this is something that, needs to happen in these polarized societies.
Absolutely amazing. And so in your course, do you cover how people can start working in their own groups and Is there anything you can share ahead around getting started in this work?
Well, one thing that I want to share is in my course, I talk completely about how to set up your clients into small groups and how powerful that can be for them as an additional bonus where they have this support, this love and support that carries on.
Mm.
And I've seen it with, when I do retreats. I mean, we had a retreat last October in Tuscany, and we had some really ill people come to it. I mean, one guy had diabetes and post-polio syndrome. He continued to meet virtually. I put everybody into groups in the very first day. He continued to meet with his group virtually on Skype. His diabetes is reversed now. And it's really, he didn't do anything other than meet with this group, anything different other than meeting with this group. So I think it's an amazing, powerful modality that I teach practitioners, but also, healing is a lonely business. And healing is an exhaustive business too. You feel so responsible. So I also talk to the practitioners about setting up their own Power of 8 groups. And last year when I ran this course, many of the practitioners on the course created Power of 8 groups from the course. So we had practitioners of every variety working together as little Power of 8 groups, which they found powerful too. So it was outside their own modality, but fellow healers of some regard. And we had everything from doctors and nurses to every alternative practitioner under the book.
Absolutely amazing. I'm so looking forward to it.
So one thing I can leave people with, which is one thing that people never do that I find is so much more powerful is when people do intentions, they oftentimes create some sort of generality because they think the universe should fill in the gaps and that it will be too specific, it won't work. The exact opposite has been my experience, particularly with the intention experiments, but also with all the work with groups. The more specific you are, the better. So an intention needs to be framed with a whole bunch of things like who, what, when, where, why, and how, to really tell the universe what you want. This is your request to the universe, so make it specific. I always tell people in my master class, a lot of people have an intention like, I want to be rich. And that's not really their intention. Their intention is, I want a new job, or I want to work less hard. I want more time to be with my children or grandchildren. I want to pursue a new hobby. They don't necessarily want loads of money or loads of things. What they want is something other than what they have right now. So they have to specify exactly what they want. So that's a really important part of a group effect. But the great thing about Power of 8 groups is you don't have to it doesn't take years of disciplined practice. It doesn't, we did a brain experiment with Power of 8 groups at Life University, and we used total novice students, and we found startling changes in brain waves. Very soon after they started, we had EEG caps on the senders, and almost immediately they had a turning down of the parts of the brain, the parietal lobes, that are involved with worry, with feeling separate, and they help you navigate through space, the parietal lobes. They also say, this is me, this is not me. That was turned way down, as were the parts of the brain involved with worry, doubt, negativity. So these were brainwave signatures of people in a state of ecstatic oneness. And that kind of mystical experience, which are almost identical brainwaves to those recorded by the University of Pennsylvania of Sufi masters doing chanting, and Buddhist monks during ecstatic prayer. That kind of ecstatic state of oneness is enormously healing. It's like a mystical state. And our people were total novices, and yet they got there in an instant. And the intentions, the Power of 8 groups were only for 10 minutes. So this is a kind of a fast track to the miraculous. And I think one of the great things about this modality is that it doesn't require, sweat lodges and years of disciplined practice. It just requires a little group.
It's beautiful. It really speaks to what's already there in us, helping us to uncover and partner with the other and march together so that we can heal one another.
Absolutely. There's probably nothing more strengthening than knowing somebody else has got your back.
Absolutely. Well, Lynne, thank you so much for sharing with us around this work and this program. I know it starts June 15th, and I'm looking forward to joining you in that.
Thank you. The same to you. Enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you.